Protesters versus police. Police versus rioters. Portland's seen this play out on and off for 11 straight months. And it's only shined a brighter spotlight on issues with law enforcement in this city that go back years. Here's the story. Thank you for being with us tonight. I am Dan Haggerty. This is The Story. We're going to want to hear from you. I want to have a discussion tonight, so please tell me what you're thinking about the coverage, the issues in this city, and with our policing, and with these riots and protests. All of the information at the bottom of your screen, those are the ways to reach out to us. You can email us at thestory@kgw.com or use that hashtag HeyDan on Twitter. Let's get started. And we want to start with our big story. And I want to start that by talking about one verdict and two cities. You see, after former police officer Derek Chauvin was found guilty of murdering George Floyd, the entire country was watching Minneapolis. It's where Floyd died. It's where Chauvin was on trial, where the jury reached their verdict, where racial justice protests first started last year. Here's video from last night, taken at the very intersection where Floyd was killed. Peaceful, calm. We checked in with our sister station there in Minneapolis. They told us all night it was like that, pretty quiet throughout the entire city. I mean, people celebrated, of course. You saw those images earlier in the day. They were singing and dancing in the streets. Some people barbecued, they threw parties. But everyone pretty much went home, back to their homes as it got dark. Similar stories in D.C., New York, even Houston, where George Floyd was from. Then there's Portland. Let's take a look at what happened here last night. And we should note, what you're about to see is pretty jarring. This is video shot by the Oregonian of a Portland police sergeant getting punched in the face by a man on the street.
Stand back. This has been declared an unlawful assembly. All persons must immediately leave the area by traveling to the west. Failure to adhere to this order may subject you to arrest.
It's shocking video, no doubt about that. But are you surprised that it happened? Is anyone surprised that we had violence and destruction, protests like that here in Portland last night, even after a guilty verdict? If you are surprised, you shouldn't be. Because what has happened in Portland almost nightly for almost a year has really taken on a life of its own. I talked to Maggie Vespa about this earlier. Okay, Maggie, so we're going to get to this video in just a moment. But first, can you just kind of summarize and tell us what happened last night?
Definitely. So last night, Portland basically continued to be a national anomaly. Other cities nationwide were calm. We were not. We saw damage last night like we've seen multiple times, countless times over the last year. Windows smashed in, graffiti. Starbucks was a big target, stuff like that. And I think a lot of this can be explained by your talk with Sergio Olmos last week. He's a reporter with OPB. He's been on the ground most nights. And he noted in your talk that the people out there now aren't really Black Lives Matter or racial justice activists so much. They more want to abolish the police and abolish prisons. And they don't really care about the press or about public support. And that movement is way stronger here in Portland, in the Portland area, than it is in other cities or other parts of the country, quite frankly. Got it. Now, let's talk for a second about this video that the Oregonian has. And I saw it. I watched it this morning. And I want to remind people as we go to show it that it is a little bit jarring. Right, definitely. So we'll kind of walk through it now, because in that video you can hear an officer, and we're told he's a sergeant with Portland Police, telling someone to get out of the way of his bicycle. He then slowly pushes that man back out of the area, and he turns and walks away, and the man is fine. Then, seconds later, a second man comes out of nowhere, and he punches the sergeant in the face, and then he throws him on the ground, and he keeps hitting him. And you can see It takes several officers, some of whom deployed pepper spray, according to a press release, to pull that man off. He's been ID'd as Randy Gray. He's 36 years old, according to police, and he's facing several charges, including assaulting a peace officer. And for those sitting at home wondering, the Multnomah County District Attorney has said multiple times in the past, this has never changed, that any charges that involve violence like that, he absolutely will pursue. So just worth noting there.
Right, but you know, where do we go from here? I mean, this is not sustainable, obviously, but it also doesn't feel like it's going to end.
Sure. Well, it is worth noting these gatherings have been smaller and less frequent recently. And also, Portland's mayor, Ted Wheeler, has called in Oregon State Police and the National Guard to help deal with the protests that do pop up, or these gatherings that do pop up. And as Kyle Aboshi reported, police now have secret kind of informants in the crowd helping them build cases. That said, it's also worth noting tensions spiked here again after Portland police shot and killed a man in Lents Park in Southeast Portland last week. And then yesterday, there was a police shooting in Ohio. A teenage girl died. Both of those cases are still under investigation, but they definitely threw fuel on an already raging fire. I also want to note, kind of more and more, we are hearing from activists who are really denouncing this kind of destruction and this kind of violence. Most recently, a group called We Out Here magazine. And by their own description, they're a group of Black artists, Black activists, and writers. And they issued a letter to Portland's protest community yesterday. It denounces police violence, but also to those committing this destruction and violence in Portland at protests. It says, quote, understand that doing damage to us, our communities, and our resources undoes the work that we do. And then City Commissioner Mingus Mapps also spoke on this, and he said, quote, as a Black man in one of the whitest cities in America, I appreciate my white allies. It goes on to say, please take a moment and have this conversation with at least 3 people of color. As a person of color, would trashing this Starbucks make your life better? And so, Dan, obviously, whether messages like that resonate remains to be seen, but we're hearing more of those.
We'll wait and see, I suppose. Maggie, thank you. Now, we keep asking that last question that I posed to Maggie, like, you know, what is it going to take to end this? I have yet to hear anybody explain to me how they think this violence will end. I mean, a real explanation to a real end. I do know what some of you think it will take to end this. I get emails all the time. Here's an example from Ed. These are radical anarchists, hell-bent on destroying society. It's way past time to take off the gloves and arrest all of them by any means necessary. Again, I get emails like that every night from people who want police to take off the gloves, people who don't think police are being aggressive enough. And I can promise you, none of those people are from the Department of Justice. You see, the DOJ thinks police in this city have been going bare knuckle for a while now. In fact, recently they outlined 6,000 separate instances of use of force in just 6 months last year. And this letter from the DOJ to the city demanding action is last straw territory for police, meaning if they don't make some changes or present a plan for these changes, the federal government could begin the process of taking over our police bureau. Now, that letter was sent on March 23rd of this year, just a couple of weeks ago, and the city was given 30 days to respond. And depending on how you count on the calendar, that deadline is either today or tomorrow. We reached out to police to ask if we should expect a response in that time frame, but I haven't heard back yet. Now, I discussed this with Jason Renab with the Mental Health Association of Portland, who's been following this case since the very beginning.
We haven't heard from the city of Portland. That's what the DOJ has asked for. They have asked the city to respond. If the city is not willing to do that, and they haven't been willing so far, then the issue goes to mediation, which has not been successful in the past. And if it isn't successful in mediation, then the police bureau will go into the hands of a federal judge.
How realistic do you think an outcome like that is?
It's pretty good right now.
You think it's a likely outcome that a judge could take over the entire police bureau in the near future? So
the question is, what has the police bureau done since last summer to make sure that what happened last summer in the streets doesn't happen again? And I don't think they've done much. So I think we're likely going to have another difficult summer of demonstrations and protests and more use of force against peaceful protesters.
So what happens if the feds take over? If a judge takes over PPB, they could hire and fire people. They could make broad changes if they wanted to. They could pretty much do what they want. Now, some of you might be thinking, whoa, wow, that escalated quickly, didn't it? The protests and the riots, they exploded over the summer, and suddenly the DOJ is demanding answers with these types of consequences? Well, not exactly. See, the unrest in our streets became this straw that may end up breaking PPB's back. But those straws actually started piling up a while ago. 3 mayors ago, in fact. Multiple police chiefs ago. Back in 2010. So how did we get here? In January of 2010, a Portland police officer shot and killed a man named Aaron Campbell while Campbell was having a mental health crisis. Portland's police commissioner at the time was Dan Saltzman, and he wrote to Senator Ron Wyden asking for Campbell's death to be investigated on a federal level. Wyden reached out to the Department of Justice. In the meantime, 4 other people with mental illnesses were killed by Portland police over a 2-year period.
We will be talking to people up and down the chain of command of the police force.
In 2011, the DOJ announced they would start investigating Portland police's use of force and its pattern of killing people who have mental illnesses. The investigation took 18 months, and during that time, Portland police killed 3 people with mental illnesses. In September of 2012, investigators found that Portland police had deficiencies in policy, training, and officer accountability, and that they were acting unconstitutionally. The DOJ reached a settlement with the city, and the city agreed to address Bureau policies around use of force, mental health crises, training, and accountability. 3 years later, and the DOJ checked in, and they found the Bureau was not fully complying with the agreement. In 2017, an amended settlement was reached, establishing a new community oversight group, ensuring officers who use deadly force are interviewed within 48 hours, and changing how data is collected and reported. Since the initial settlement was reached in 2012, at least 23 people with mental illnesses have been killed by Portland police. And that's how we got here. And that is more or less the story right now, with a couple of details left out for the sake of television tonight. But that's it. That's the story between the Portland police and the Department of Justice. But we should talk a little bit about the feds. You know, remember when they were sent here last year to help stop the violent clashes outside of the federal courthouse? Well, today we got a hold of an internal audit that found that those federal agents who were sent here were unprepared. Here's Kyle Aboshi.
A newly released report found that many federal officers sent to Portland last summer to protect the federal courthouse didn't have proper training or equipment to deal with large protest crowds. The internal audit found the U.S. Department of Homeland Security had the authority to send federal officers, but DHS did not have a comprehensive strategy or game plan. The report describes how roughly 750 federal officers from various agencies were deployed to Portland between June and August to help control violent clashes over racial justice and police violence. This mix of Federal Protective Service, Customs and Border Protection, ICE, and Secret Service, all working together, created inconsistencies. They wore different uniforms, had different radios, which made communication tough, and the agencies had different policies. For example, Border Patrol might use a less than lethal device that ICE doesn't. Some officers question the tactics used by other components, such as when to engage rioters with force, the report says. In response to the audit, Homeland Security explained the situation in Portland was especially challenging because the level of violence directed at officers and because local leaders didn't want Portland police helping the feds. Additionally, Homeland Security explained officers had to deal with new protester tactics like attacks with lasers that they weren't equipped for. The federal review also addressed concerns about cell phone surveillance. The report says no equipment was set up to obtain cell phone information or locations during the protests, although ICE confirmed it did get some information through consent from the user or a search warrant. Kyle Aboshi, KGW News.
I bet some of you out there are handy men, handy women. If so, have you tried to buy any wood lately? because you might rethink that DIY project after you see the price. And we want to take a trip into the KGW vault when the late Walter Mondale was visiting Portland while campaigning for vice president.
That you're about to make this state go for the Carter ticket on November 2nd. I can see that.
When the story continues. We spent a lot of time in the first part of that show talking about a single topic or kind of a single umbrella that covers similar things. But if you have some opinions on that, how we covered it, what we're talking about, please reach out and tell us. I read all of it. It's the hashtag HeyDan on Twitter. Keep them coming. Question for you. How much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? Not a lot at these prices. A lot of us have gone a little stir crazy at home since the coronavirus hit. Maybe we've decided to do a home improvement project, one or two, build a fence, maybe a new patio, something like that. But once you get to the hardware store, you're looking around, you're checking out the price of wood, and you're going, what, is this how much wood costs? Feels like a lot. And it is. It's nearly quadrupled in the past year, and they show no signs of letting up. Here's Joe Ranieri.
Supply and demand, economics 101, right? That's a big reason so many of us are having sticker shock as we walk through local hardware stores. Just ask Mark Hartman. He's the Director of Purchasing and Finance with Renaissance Homes. He said last January it cost him about $8 for a sheet of plywood.
Now it's costing me in the low to mid 40s for one sheet of OSB. You go to Home Depot, you're going to spend $40-some a sheet for OSB, and what it cost you $8 a year ago. So a typical house of ours, it may take, let's say, an average 300 to 350 sheets of OSB. So just do the math on that, and that's a huge chunk in one single line item.
That OSB he's talking about is plywood. In some cases, it costs $20,000 to $25,000 more to build a home just with the high cost of plywood. He says there's a couple of reasons behind the huge cost, which is now 4 times what it was this time last year for supplies. Part of it has to do with the fact that more people are purchasing homes, especially with mortgage rates hitting historical lows.
Mortgage rates are very low. That means that you can afford more when you get a mortgage for 30 years. And really, the United States has just not been building enough new houses for the last decade.
Jeff Reimer is a professor of applied economics at Oregon State University. He says this trend is happening all over the country.
It just really seems to be the very strong demand for lumber right now by the big home builders, some of which are in the Pacific Northwest, but this is really more of a nationwide thing. So the Southwest, the Southern United States, all over really.
Along with the demand for new homes comes the need for more material. Where does the majority of that come from? Canada, and it's not easy to get from our neighbors to the north right now.
So there's been some changes in supply from Canada. We have tariffs on softwood coming from Canada. A lot of mills closed in 2019 in Canada. There's also been some less availability from mills in the southern United States.
When COVID-19 hit, some mills in both Canada and the United States were forced to close or even shut down for good. More than a year later, some are just now getting back up and running. That not only impacts builders, but also your bottom line.
Some of these things can't be sustained forever because it makes the overall cost so prohibitive nationwide that it's got to slow housing down. But at the same time, you need housing because we got such a shortage of it and people need a place to live. So it's a tough spot right now. The labor side of things hasn't really gone up that crazy. In some areas, it's gone up a little, but mostly just material costs and severe material shortages.
A demand that doesn't appear to be stopping anytime soon.
All right, Joe Ranieri joining us now real quick. I just want to know, look, the prices can't keep going up forever. Can they? Are they expected to stop at some point?
And that's a great question. I want to show you some of the new construction that we've been talking about here the last couple of minutes. This is over in southwest Portland near Bull Mountain. This is what much of the Portland metro area is seeing, a lot of new construction. And to answer your question, Dan, nobody seems to know when this will all end. The professor you just heard from Oregon State University said maybe in another 6 months, but another expert I spoke with said he's not sure, and he has more than 30 years experience in the industry of building homes. So who knows when this all ends, but it's just crazy to go through a lumber store to pick up some plywood, and it's cost you a lot more than it did just a year ago.
Yeah, people had plans to build a back deck or build a fence in the backyard, and they're on hold for now. But we'll keep an eye on it for you. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
All right, we've had a lot going on this week, but I'm sure you probably saw the news that we lost a former vice president, Walter Mondale, who served under Jimmy Carter in the 70s, has died at the age of 93. Now, besides his tenure as VP, he might be best known for losing the presidency to Ronald Reagan in a landslide of landslides in 1984. I mean, seriously, he only won his home state of Minnesota and D.C. You just do not see electoral maps like this one anymore. But we dug out a clip from the KGW vault from a couple of elections before that, when he campaigned in Portland in 1976.
This is Mondale's second visit to Oregon during the presidential campaign, and it points to the state's Carter campaign's efforts to hold on to its ever-shrinking lead over the Republicans. The vice presidential candidate was met at the airport by some of his more prominent supporters in Oregon. The prominence gave way to enthusiasm in a tent meeting near Madison High School. Mondale's speech kicked off a caucus of Democratic county chairpersons who are meeting to assess just how well the Democratic ticket is doing in this state.
That you're about to make this state go for the Carter ticket on November 2nd. I can see that.
Mondale could not resist talking about the environment to the Oregon crowd, but the bulk of the speech attacked the administration's economic policies. His remarks follow yesterday's commerce report that showed the gross national product in the last quarter rising by a disappointing 4%.
This country needs a president who will make this economy work to produce jobs and to end inflation. We cannot solve this nation's problems unless everyone who wants a job can get one, and unless a dollar once earned is worth a dollar.
There were a handful of picketers in the crowd who were a part of that unemployment figure. They would sporadically chant, "We want jobs, not hot air." Mondale was in Portland for less than 2 hours and was quickly on his way to Seattle. But before he left, he held a brief news conference at the airport. Mondale was asked about another presidential candidate who was in Portland tonight. Will Eugene McCarthy take away vital votes from the Democratic ticket?
We think that voters are very practical, and they realize that there's only one of two persons who could possibly be elected president, Mr. Carter or Mr. Ford.
This is Sam Thomas for Channel 8 News from the airport.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you for tuning in. Let's talk about the vault for just one more second. If you have any ideas for the vault, let me know. Use that hashtag HeyDan. Anything else you want to say? Now's the time. I'm going to read some comments after the break. All right, let's get to a couple of comments. We don't have a ton of time. Getting a lot of feedback on the tie tonight. Thank you. A guy just wants to look nice sometimes. Also, we got some news about people who are having trouble DVRing this show on a regular basis when you just set it to repeat and DVR time and time again. Apparently, that has been fixed. So go ahead and cancel the recording and reinstate it, and you'll be able to have all the shows recorded on your DVR. I got an email from Avery. Hey, Dan. I love watching your show. You are so informative, but fun. And I love your hairstyle. You have a lot of truth to your stories. I appreciate that. Thank you for using your time and knowledge to educate others. Thank you, Avery, 11 years old, 5th grade. You're a much better writer than I ever was at that age, so come take my job. Thank you, Avery. But just to keep me balanced here, I did get an email from Marcia a little earlier because I've been co-anchoring the 5 o'clock news with Laurel again, and Marcia wanted to keep me down to earth and said, why is it necessary to include Dan Haggerty as a co-anchor with Laurel Porter at KGW News at 5? He has his own show, After Nightly News with Lester Holt, and that's enough of him. Thanks, Marcia. Well, Marcia, if you like your Laurel Porter a la carte, that's coming up next at 6:30. For now, that's the story. See you back here on a Thursday.
Visit drdarm.com, then call for your free virtual